Time is a human construct. But if it wasn't, now would be the time to back Sexton Lovecraft. That's Sexton Lovecraft, not me, although I am Sexton Lovecraft, if time was real, which it isn't.
Hello and welcome to my review of The Lady of the Shroud by Dracula author Bram Stoker. Like its more famous forebear, this 1909 novel is epistolary. This means that it's formed from a number of sources such as letters, a will, journals, and predominantly our protagonist, Robert. Robert inherits a large estate provided he agrees to spend a year in its foreign holding, a castle in the land of the Blue Mountains. He agrees and sets about ingratiating himself with the local population, with things being complicated by threats of a Turkish invasion and occasional nightly visits from the titular Lady of the Shroud, who he comes to believe is a vampire. Can Robert win over the locals, fend off the Turks, and save his lady from her undead state? The Lady of the Shroud is easily one of the best books I've ever read, quite possibly one of the best books ever committed to paper. No, I'm just kidding. It's genuinely terrible, with virtually nothing I could describe as a redeeming feature. I'll give it a go anyway. The first 2 pages nominally form an occult journal, tell of the mysterious sighting of a woman, possibly a vampire, at sea, and sets up a mystery that could be better served by any other author to have ever walked the face of the earth. And that is because the second part, from the record made by Ernest Melton, is mostly about the reading of his uncle's will. Rupert is much maligned by the narrator as something of an absentee wildcard and the black sheep of an offshoot of the Melton family. As such, Ernest is quite surprised to find the bulk of the family fortune is left to Rupert if he agrees to spend a year in the country of the Blue Mountains. He agrees, considering it something of an adventure. This section actually has a nice concept behind it, with the narrator here, Ernest, maligning our future protagonist, Rupert. The character moments are done well, with Ernest being snide and unlikable, but not to the extent that we doubt his opinions of Rupert. Stoker, though, switches that around when we learn that Rupert is brave, strong, adventurous, and open-minded, unlike his Weasley cousin. It'd be a nice idea if we learnt that for ourselves through reading Rupert's adventure, but we don't. We learn about it in an extremely long letter from the dead uncle. This would be painful enough without the 30-page will being related in full. This is section 2 of the book, but as section 1 is 2 lines over 2 pages, it's not just our introduction to the characters, but also to the story and, more importantly, the book. It is beyond tedious, one of the worst parts of any book I've ever read, and probably about as interesting as learning about probate law for yourself. Genuinely, I wonder if there is a duller opening to any book, and also how many potential readers of this one have given up on it, having not even finished this section. I have, in the past, read a book where a guy was travelling to a foreign castle and related why in a handful of pages along the way. No idea who wrote that, but the character's name was Jonathan Harker. No sooner have the letters from his uncle been read and finished extolling in some detail the strengths of Rupert's previously maligned character, then the narrative moves from England to the Blue Mountains, and in numerous letters Rupert sends to his family about his new life in the castle, he begins extolling in some detail the strengths of his previously maligned character. The letters from Rupert also contain a lot of information about life in the Blue Mountains and are sent to his auntie Janet. Once or twice he mentions attempts to arm the locals for their coming skirmishes with the Turks, but mostly he describes in some considerable detail the place where he lives. There are far too many of these letters, and while they're a marked improvement on the previous section, that only means that it is boring instead of tedious. This is not a country or culture related after exhaustive research. Stoker just made it all up, and it's really obvious. Not only that, but because Janet didn't seem to reply to her nephew, we get one side of a conversation that's not very interesting, and my God, is Rupert a blowhard. In the third part, entitled The Coming of the Lady, the vast majority of the narrative is taken from Rupert's journal, and he spends quite a bit of it saying how great he is. He also details the random nighttime visits from the Lady of the Shroud mentioned in the title, who is none other than the boat-faring vampire of the prologue. Rupert immediately falls in love with her, and although little occurs beyond the lady sitting by his fire, he keeps the visit secret from his aunt in case she pries. There is apparently a threat of a Turkish invasion, and Rupert is keen to win over the locals by arming them, but this comes in random comments out of the blue, like, oh yeah, I bought them 50,000 guns, and later, oh, and a warship. The ship, by the way, may as well not be in the book for all its use. The Turkish ship waiting off the coast in the finale can be held at bay by cannons on the shore. It's basically padding and filler, something for Rupert to mention between the lady's visits, which are themselves repetitive, as is his pining for her when she's not there. He explores the local area and discovers the lady in a glass coffin held within the crypts of a local church. On his second visit, he finds her gone. But the intrigue around the question of whether she's a vampire or not might have been great in 1907, when the law around things wasn't quite so set in stone, but the fact that her heart beats, that she breathes, that she nearly dies of hypothermia seem like clues she might not be undead. Locking her in a crypt that is barely guarded and making her play dead seems a far stupider way to protect her than just asking Rupert to guard her in his castle, or guarding her yourself in any other castle. Eventually the two are married, and a very long ritual performed mostly in the dark, where everything has to be done 3 times for some reason. In the process of this, they learn the plot twist. The lady is in fact not a vampire. The Turkish Sultan wished to marry her to have a future claim on the country, so the locals faked her death, keeping her in the crypt in a glass coffin. They spread rumours of her being undead to keep people from the area. Unfortunately, the crypt flooded occasionally, which was the cause of her sodden appearances at Rupert's door. Later, though, when Rupert expects a visit from her, she doesn't arrive. It then comes to light that she was on her way to him and kidnapped by a Turkish force. The 6th section switches the narrative between Rupert's journal and some highly verbose letters from a priest who has joined forces with him to pursue the Turks. They eventually corner the Turks in a canyon and kill them, with Rupert naturally performing the heroics, leaping into a tree and plummeting through the branches. Nobody seems to question if he, in fact, might be undead, given that nobody could have survived that, but being daft isn't the same sort of crime against fiction as being tedious, and the tedium, being fair to Stoker, does lift somewhat when she gets kidnapped and Rupert gives chase. Unfortunately, the dual narrative of 2 windbags does not make things that much more exciting, and the attempts at action bring things up a notch, but the novel had several that it wasn't troubling, so it still has plenty to spare. However, the lady's father is the country's de facto king, and now he's been kidnapped by Turks as well, those pesky Turks. They're holding him in the tower, but apparently on the roof of it and unguarded, so Rupert easily rescues him in a hot air balloon. The Turks get what for, and everybody else lives happily ever after. The final rescue of this leader is pathetic as well, a tacked-on addition with a character not previously seen in the book at all, so our interest in his well-being is not great, but it's significantly better than the Turkish attempts to guard their prison, which is negligible. And despite that, the book apparently still has room for a completely unnecessary conclusion, ham-fistedly drawn from Janet McKelpie's notes. Quite why they're not just called a journal is anybody's guess. Her notes merely repeat what Stoker has already shown and told us in the story, but if he didn't repeat himself over and over, it wouldn't be a very long book. It's only 192 pages in this edition, but only the first 2 are worth reading. Dracula came out in 1897 alongside a book called The Beetle by Richard Marsh. The 2 men were friends and even had, so the legend goes, a bet on who would sell more copies. Marsh won. Dracula would find more success later, but The Beetle, if you've ever read it, and I do recommend it, is split into different sections, and each one tackles the styles that were very popular in the fiction of the time. There is mysticism from the Empire, romance, and a detective story. I think that Stoker is trying to do something similar here. The fascination with the mountain people reads like an ethnographic study, the problem being, despite the mention of Turkish aggression, for the most part there's no story beyond Rupert wanting to be their friend. In The Beetle, the protagonist has a near-death experience and chases the bad guy across London. Stoker has brought the mysticism to a nondescript place and forgot the adventure altogether. He then switches things to a romance, but because Rupert and his future wife Tueta are highborn and noble and good Christians, there's not a shred of romance to be found. Additionally, I wouldn't care much if there was, because Rupert has by this point spent so much time telling the reader how great he is at everything that he's actually not very likeable. I cared more when Jaws got the girl in Moonraker than I did about Rupert's much professed love. Part of what makes him difficult to like is not just how long-winded he is, nor that he constantly tells us how great he is, though none of that helps. He has a curiously repetitive style. The great doorway, set in a magnificent frontage of carved stone of manifestly ancient date, faced west, so that when one enters, he went east. To my surprise, for I somehow expected the contrary, I found the door open, not wide open, but what is called ajar, manifestly not locked or barred. That one may be down to sloppiness, but it is in keeping with the rest of his narrative. Indeed, I began to expect that Aunt Janet would, ere long, have some prophetic insight to the matter. She had been so wonderfully correct in her prophetic surmises with regard to both the visits to my room. This one again you might put down to sloppiness. You can see the 3 repeats of the gorgeous robe of cloth of gold. But this one is in keeping with a number of other examples. The voivode intuit of Visceron died mysteriously of a mysterious ailment. He's difficult to read, but much harder to enjoy, and so long-winded that I began to wonder if I could speed-read his dialogue and not lose anything. For those that don't know, and there are other methods and other definitions, this works better for non-fiction, but if you're looking for something specific, you basically read the first sentence and the last sentence of a paragraph and work out from that if what you're looking for is likely to be in the paragraph. There is no ritual that I fear, so long as it be that it is for your good and your lasting happiness, and if the end of it may be that I may call you mine, there is no horror in life or death that I shall not gladly face. Dear, I ask you nothing. I am content to leave myself in your hands. You shall advise me when the time comes, and I shall be satisfied, content to obey. Content, it is but a poor word to express what I long for. I shall shirk nothing which may come to me from this or any other world, so long as it is to make you mine. When you do it here, you realise that you can not only cut out everything between the first and last sentence, but also that they say the same thing. The final act switches to another genre and becomes a war book, but sometimes you just have to accept that the epistolary style makes things difficult for you, and Stoker overcomplicates things by adding in the letters from the Archbishop Stephen Paleolog, head of the Eastern Church of the Blue Mountains, and just writing that title out in full is an energy sapper, but the Archbishop is as verbose as Rupert, if not more so. Stoker's style and choices are the equivalent of the meme where the guy puts a stick in his own spokes. When Rupert rescues the king, he lowers down some bulletproof clothes for him to wear, and then they escape without a shot being fired. So you have the breaking of the verisimilitude with non-existent technology, and then the opposite of a Chekhov's gun, the bulletproof nonsense that's never used. It's a small example of Stoker taking all those unused vampire stakes and putting them in his own spokes over and over and over. As plots go, it's impossible to deny that stuff is going on, but again, Stoker's narrative style, as well as fragmenting the novel into 6 sections, makes things very episodic, and a drag, they're always that. In conclusion, with a lead that is hard to warm to, an opening act that may well be the most poorly conceived in all of the history of the written world, this book sets itself up to be a slog. I suspect that only the devotees and hardiest of completionists will drag themselves through that opening, and their reward for such diligence is a patchy and disjointed novel thick with staid yet melodramatic romance, an empire adventure that is neither from the empire or adventurous, and some of the most wordy and repetitive narratives you will ever read, none of which does any great service to a lumbering and largely uninteresting story or characters. Worse, what little action, excitement or intrigue there is to be found here is often weakened by the narrative choices rather than helped. At best, The Lady of the Shroud is silly nonsense that takes itself far too seriously. At worst, it is tedious, unreadable silly nonsense that takes itself far too seriously. Impossible to recommend to anyone but the most extremely committed Stoker fans, and they've probably read it already. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more of this sort of thing. I thought I might bring back the pronoun game. It's been a while, and I'm sure there is somebody out there who misses it. If Aunt Janet scolds me, it's pretty good proof that I ought to be scolded. I wonder if I dare tell her at all. No, it is too strange. She is only a woman after all, and if she knew I loved, I wish I knew her name and thought, as I might myself do, only that I resist it, that she is not alive at all. Well, what she would either think or do beats me. I suppose she would want to slip at me as she used to do when I was a wee kiddie, in a different way, of course.